I was 17 when I started counting down the days until my 18th birthday. Not because I was excited to be an adult, but because I knew that was the day I could finally leave. My name's Ryan, and I grew up in a house that looked picture perfect from the outside. Two-story, white shutters, a big oak tree in the front yard. But inside, it always felt like I was breathing someone else's air. Like I was a guest in a home that didn't want me. My brother, Mason, is 2 years younger than me, and somehow, he's always been the golden boy. I don't mean that in a petty, older brother kind of way. I mean he could literally crash the family car into the mailbox, and they'd ask if he was feeling okay. Meanwhile, I once forgot to vacuum before dinner and got grounded for a week. Growing up, I learned to live quietly. I didn't want to give them a reason to get angry. I'd hear the tone in my dad's voice change when I walked into a room. Tight, clipped, like I was a problem that hadn't been solved yet. My mom wasn't much better. She didn't yell, but she had this way of looking right through me, like I was someone else's kid who wandered into the wrong house. Mason, though, he had that effortless smile, the easy charm, and a way of always being in the right place at the right time. He was the miracle baby. After a series of miscarriages, he was the one who made it. I think my parents decided right then and there that he was special, and everything else just faded. Still, I tried. I got good grades. I stayed out of trouble. I worked part-time stocking shelves at the grocery store to save for college because I already knew they weren't going to help. Every time the conversation veered toward my future, my dad would just grunt and say, "You're smart. You'll figure it out." Mason, on the other hand, got a new laptop for his 16th birthday because he needed it for school, even though he mostly used it to play games and scroll TikTok. I remember asking my mom if I could borrow it once to fill out college applications. She said, "Ask your brother." I did. He said no. So when my 18th birthday finally came around, I wasn't expecting much. Maybe a card. A family dinner. I didn't even expect a gift. I just wanted, I don't know, a moment. Some kind of acknowledgement that I'd made it through 18 years in a house that barely tolerated me. That maybe, just maybe, they saw me. My birthday landed on a Saturday that year. I didn't have to work, so I woke up a little late and came downstairs expecting at least a happy birthday from someone. What I got instead was my dad in the kitchen, tying a bow onto a sleek black box, and Mason bouncing on his heels like a kid on Christmas morning. I stood there, half asleep, watching this little moment between them like I was intruding. My mom turned around with a big smile and said, "Perfect timing. Come on, Mason, open it." No one looked at me. No one even noticed that I hadn't spoken yet. Mason ripped into the box and let out this fake gasp, like he'd just won the lottery. Inside was a silver watch, expensive looking, with a leather band and Roman numerals. "Oh my God, Dad, this is so sick." Mason grinned, slipping it onto his wrist. "Now I don't have to borrow your old one anymore." My dad laughed and ruffled his hair. "Well, you've earned it, kid. You've been working so hard lately." Hard. The kid's biggest accomplishment that week was making it to second base with some girl in his chemistry class. I stared at them, frozen, waiting for someone to remember the actual reason the day mattered. My mom finally glanced over at me and said, "Don't look so sour, Ryan. It's not always about gifts. When you're older, you'll understand that what matters is who you become, not what you get." It hit me like a slap. She said it in that calm, condescending voice she always used when she wanted to seem wise, like I was some selfish kid who just didn't get it. I tried to nod, to play along, but my throat tightened. "I thought we were having cake," I mumbled. "Oh, we did that earlier," Mason said casually. "While you were sleeping." I blinked. "You had cake without me?" "It was just a small thing," my mom said quickly. "Nothing big." "Whose name was on it?" There was a silence, just a beat too long. Then Mason smirked and said, "Mine. I mean, it was a joint thing. But it's not your birthday." "Don't be dramatic," my dad snapped. "It's just a cake." I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw something. But instead, I laughed. It was sharp and short and didn't sound like me. I laughed because if I didn't, I was going to cry right there in front of them, and I didn't want to give them the satisfaction. Mason raised an eyebrow like I was the crazy one, and my mom gave me this look, all pity and disappointment, like I was ruining a perfectly good day. That night, I didn't even bother turning the light on when I went up to my room. I sat on my bed for a long time, just staring at the floor, trying to swallow the lump in my throat. I kept thinking, they're never going to love you the way you want them to. It doesn't matter what you do. It doesn't matter how hard you try. You're never going to be Mason. So I made a decision. I grabbed my backpack and stuffed it with a hoodie, a water bottle, a few granola bars, and the $60 I had stashed in an envelope in the back of my sock drawer. I didn't have a plan, not really. But I had my ID, a phone charger, and a bus schedule I'd secretly printed from the library weeks ago. At midnight, while the house was quiet and everyone was asleep, I slipped out the back door and didn't look back. I figured I'd stay gone for a day or two. Maybe crash at the shelter near the downtown church. Maybe try to find a part-time job, or couch surf if I could find someone kind enough. I didn't know. I just knew I couldn't stay. What I didn't expect was that 2 weeks later, my phone would buzz with a number I hadn't seen in days. My dad. I let it ring the first time, and the second, but on the third try, I answered. Before I could say anything, his voice came through, choked up, barely above a whisper. "Your room's still here," he said. "Please, pick up. Just tell me where you are. Please." That's when I realized something had shifted. I just didn't know what, or why. And the part that scared me most? I wasn't sure if I wanted to go back. I didn't go back. Not that week, not the next. And not after the voicemail my dad left 2 days later, this time quieter, a little angrier. "I don't know what you think you're proving, Ryan. But this isn't how family works. You don't just vanish." That part made me laugh a little. Ironic, considering I'd spent my entire life feeling like a ghost in that house. I stayed gone. I bounced around, first at the church shelter, then at this small room-for-rent setup run by a retired mechanic named Lynn who had a soft spot for strays, both dogs and people. I paid him what I could, $1.30 a week, for a mattress in the corner of his garage that he'd walled off with plywood and a curtain. It smelled like oil and rust, but it was warm, and for the first time, I didn't have to tiptoe around someone else's rules just to exist. I found part-time work unloading trucks at a shipping warehouse and spent the rest of my hours filling out college applications at the public library, using computers that timed out every 30 minutes. I didn't tell anyone where I was. I didn't want them to find me until I had something to show for it. But eventually, they did find me. It was Mason who showed up first. I was walking out of the library one afternoon when I saw him leaning against a car that was definitely too nice for him. New model, shiny black paint, leather seats. He hadn't seen me yet. He was staring at his phone like he was bored. I froze. My instinct was to turn and bolt in the other direction, but curiosity pinned me in place. He spotted me a second later and smirked like I was late to something I didn't know I'd been invited to. "There you are," he said, slipping his phone into his jacket. "You look like crap, bro." "Thanks," I said flatly. "Seriously though, Mom's freaking out. Dad's being weird. You made your point, okay? Come home." "I'm not coming home." He rolled his eyes. "Come on, man. You had your little tantrum. Now everyone's waiting for you to crawl back so things can go back to normal." That word, normal, hit me like a brick. "You mean where my birthday cake had your name on it?" I asked. "That kind of normal?" He shrugged like I'd just brought up the weather. "It was just a mix-up. You always take things so seriously. They didn't mean anything by it." "You're right," I said. "They never mean anything by it. That's the problem." His smile dropped. "Look, I don't know what kind of sob story you're telling yourself, but you're not the only one with problems, okay? You don't see me running away." "No," I said. "You just see the world bending to make sure you don't have to." That got to him. His jaw tightened. "Whatever. Just know that when you finally come back, don't expect a parade. They've been bending over backward trying to reach you." I nodded slowly. "Yeah? Did they tell you what they said the night I left?" He didn't answer. I didn't expect him to. "Tell them I'm doing fine," I said, turning away. "And if they're really so worried, they can stop calling my number and start thinking about why I stopped picking up." A week passed. Then 2. I started hearing less from them. No more voicemails. No more texts. I figured they'd given up, moved on, probably reallocated my bedroom to a storage space or a mini home gym or whatever project they could come up with to fill the silence. I thought that was the end of it, until I got an email. Not from my parents. From my high school counselor, Mrs. Devereaux. It was short and awkward, like she didn't know whether to be concerned or polite. She said she hoped I was safe and okay, but she wanted to let me know that my transcripts had been requested and withdrawn. According to the system, my parents had contacted the school and said I would not be attending college and to cancel any further application correspondence. I sat there in the library staring at the screen, not breathing. I read it again, then a third time. They tried to erase me. I called the school immediately, heart pounding, and thankfully Mrs. Devereaux picked up. I explained everything. She confirmed it with an apology in her voice, but it was clear she hadn't known the full story. I spent the next 2 days untangling the mess, making sure my applications weren't affected. A few deadlines had already passed. I missed a scholarship opportunity that I had a real shot at. That night, I didn't sleep. I kept turning the email over in my head, wondering what kind of people go out of their way to block their own child's future. It wasn't even about control anymore. It was sabotage. I didn't want revenge. Not yet. What I wanted was to disappear so thoroughly from their narrative that one day, they'd have to explain to someone why their firstborn son never came home. But fate had other ideas. Because a month later, I got a letter in the mail. A real letter, paper, envelope, no return address, just my name scrawled in my dad's handwriting. Inside, there was no apology. There was a list. A literal bullet-pointed list of things you need to do before we can talk about you coming home. It included gems like, stop blaming others for your unhappiness. Apologize for walking out and ghosting your family. Recognize the sacrifices we made for you. Understand that we do what we do out of love. I read it in silence. Then I laughed, because what else could I do? It wasn't a letter. It was a contract. A way to make me the problem again. A way to pull me back into the loop of guilt, obligation, and performance. I crumpled it, tossed it into the trash, and told myself for the 100th time that I was done. But then came the moment that changed everything. It happened in early spring. I'd started working more hours at the warehouse, trying to save for community college, when Len came into the garage one evening holding a thick envelope. He said someone had come by earlier, asked if Ryan lived here, and handed it off without saying a word. I opened it slowly. Inside was a formal letter. Legal. From a lawyer's office. It said I was being removed as a dependent from my parents' tax records, retroactively. That I was no longer considered part of their household. That I had until the end of the month to collect any remaining personal belongings from their property before it would be disposed of at the homeowner's discretion. There was a note attached. A sticky note. All it said was, "This is what consequences look like. Sign, Mom." That was the moment. The switch. I felt something inside me harden, settle. It wasn't anger. It wasn't even sadness. It was clarity. They weren't just trying to hurt me. They were trying to erase me. And if they wanted to play that game, they had no idea who I was about to become. For 2 days after I got the letter, I didn't speak. Len noticed. He didn't press me. Just slid an extra sandwich across the workbench during lunch and said, "Whatever it is, kid, it won't last forever. Not if you don't let it." I nodded, but I didn't believe him. Rock bottom doesn't always look like some dramatic fall. Sometimes it's just quiet. A dull ache that settles in your chest and never leaves. It's walking home after a double shift, fingers sore, boots soaked, and realizing you don't have a home, just a garage with no insulation and a curtain for privacy. It's sitting in that cold room at 3 a.m. with your hoodie pulled over your face, knowing your family has written you off like a bad investment. They weren't just done with me. They were punishing me for leaving. I didn't even have much to go back for. A few clothes. A shelf of books I'd collected over the years. My guitar, if it hadn't already been sold or tossed. But even still, I felt hollow knowing my name, my space, my existence in that house was being scrubbed clean like I was some stain on their perfect family portrait. And the worst part? I almost let it break me. That week, I skipped 2 shifts. I didn't answer Len when he knocked. I didn't check my email, didn't eat much, didn't sleep. I just lay there listening to the wind push against the garage door, wondering what I was even doing anymore. But then something stupid saved me. A book. Well, not just any book, my book. One I thought I'd lost in the move. It was buried in the bottom of my backpack, a worn-out, dog-eared copy of Into the Wild by Jon Krakauer. I'd read it 3 times already, but that night, I flipped it open and landed on a sentence I'd underlined years ago in red ink. Happiness is only real when shared. It should have made me feel worse. Instead, it made me sit up, because I realized I'd been trying to share my life with people who never wanted it. I kept handing over pieces of myself hoping someone would say, "We see you. You matter." But they never would. That wasn't the family I was born into. And I couldn't change them. I could only change me. The next morning, I went back to work. I apologized to my supervisor for missing shifts and offered to take the graveyard slot for the next 2 weeks to make up for it. He didn't ask questions, just grunted and handed me a badge for the overnight crew. The work was harder, Heavier boxes, colder nights. But I didn't care. I needed it. That was the beginning of my rebuild. Quiet. Simple. Mine. Over the next few months, I fell into a rhythm. Wake up. Work. Read. Sleep. Repeat. I started putting aside every extra dollar. I downloaded budgeting apps, cut out anything unnecessary, even stopped using data on my phone to save on the bill. Len noticed and started slipping me extra chores to earn credit toward rent. Sometimes he'd toss me a 20 and say, for groceries, pretending like I hadn't just scrubbed his entire truck engine clean. I applied to community college again, this time without my parents' help, and paid the application fee myself. I wrote an essay that was so brutally honest. I cried after hitting submit. I didn't sugarcoat anything. I talked about growing up invisible, about the way silence can scream louder than words, about rebuilding yourself from scratch when no one hands you the tools. And then, slowly, things started shifting. One night, while mopping the warehouse floor, I overheard two of the logistics guys complaining about a shipping software glitch. I'd picked up a little coding knowledge from an online course I'd been dabbling in. Nothing serious, just a free class on Python. But I offered a solution anyway. They shrugged it off at first. But 2 days later, one of them pulled me aside and said, "Hey, that thing you mentioned? It worked." Next thing I knew, I was unofficially the guy people came to when the systems froze or the printers went haywire. I didn't get a raise or a title, but people started learning my name, started thanking me, started seeing me. It was a weird feeling. The kind of weird that makes you sit with it for a while and whisper, maybe I'm not just background noise. My first big win came in early summer. I got an email from the community college, accepted, with a scholarship, too. Not a full ride, but enough to cover tuition if I kept working part-time. I remember staring at the screen, rereading the word congratulations over and over, like it might vanish if I blinked too hard. Len let me use his kitchen that night to bake a boxed cake. It came out lopsided and slightly burned, but I didn't care. I wrote my own name on it in blue frosting. Ryan. Just that. Ryan. No shared celebration. No forgotten candle. No lecture. Just me, a beat-up garage, and the first piece of joy I'd built with my own 2 hands. I didn't call my parents. I didn't tell them. But I knew they'd find out eventually. Because people talk. Especially in our town. And sure enough, one day at the grocery store, I ran into an old neighbor, Mrs. Kavanaugh, a kind woman who used to sneak me cookies when my mom wasn't looking. She smiled wide when she saw me, said, "I heard you're going to college. Your mom must be so proud." I just nodded and said, "Yeah, must be." But I knew better. They weren't proud. They were probably pissed that I'd done it without them. And I was okay with that. Because their approval wasn't the currency I needed anymore. Later that week, I got a call from an unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. It was my mom. She didn't cry. She didn't yell. She just said, "We heard about school. Glad you're doing well. I hope you'll remember where you came from." I replayed that line 5 times. Where I came from. Like I was some wandering stray who needed to return to his kennel. But I didn't feel angry. I felt free. By the end of that summer, I'd moved out of Len's garage. I found a shared apartment near campus with 2 roommates who kept to themselves and didn't ask questions. I started classes and landed a part-time IT gig at the school's help desk. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills. And little by little, I began building something that looked suspiciously like a life. I still had scars, emotional ones. I still flinched when people raised their voices. Still second-guessed compliments. Still caught myself apologizing for taking up space. But I was learning. Healing isn't loud. It's not always dramatic. Sometimes it's just drinking coffee in a quiet room and realizing you're not afraid to be seen anymore. One night, I opened a new notebook. Wrote down a list. Not of goals. Of truths. Things I'd learned. Things no one could take from me. At the top, I wrote, "You don't need permission to become someone they never imagined." And under it, your worth isn't measured by someone else's disappointment. You can start over, even when they say you can't. Family isn't who you're born to. It's who roots for you in the quiet. I closed the notebook, turned out the light, and slept better than I had in years. But I should have known it wasn't over. Because just when I thought I was finally free, something happened that pulled me right back in. Something that changed everything. It started with a message request. Late one night, I was reviewing my notes for an upcoming midterm, sitting on the floor of my apartment with a half-eaten burrito and 3 different tabs open on laptop troubleshooting, when I noticed a new message on Facebook. I hadn't used Facebook in months, maybe longer. Just kept the account alive in case of emergencies or identity verification. The sender's name froze me. Mrs. Langford, my parents' old neighbor. The one with the garden that used to spill into our backyard. She was always kind, but distant. Friendly in the way suburban neighbors are, cordial waves, polite holiday cards, whispered gossip across fences. I hadn't spoken to her in years. The message was simple. Hey Ryan, I wasn't sure if I should say anything, but I thought you had the right to know. Your parents listed your childhood home for sale. The sign just went up this week. Hope you're doing well. I stared at the message, then reread it. The house was up for sale. Our house. For a second, I didn't feel anything. Just blankness. Then something flickered. Not quite sadness. Not anger, either. Something else. Something sharper, colder. I'd always assumed they'd sell eventually. That once Mason graduated or moved out, they'd downsize or relocate to some gated community where the HOA newsletter came with a warning label. But the fact that it was now, after everything, after cutting me off, after pretending I never existed, something about the timing didn't sit right. So I did what any reasonably curious person would do. I opened Zillow. It didn't take long to find the listing. There it was, a bright, overexposed photo of our front porch, the white shutters cleaned up, the old oak tree still casting a crooked shadow across the lawn. The description was flowery and fake. Charming family home with rich character, lovingly maintained for over 2 decades. For bedrooms, custom finishes, quiet neighborhood. I scrolled through the photos. Living room, kitchen, master bedroom. Then, bedroom 1. I clicked. My breath caught. They'd turned my room into a guest suite. Neutral walls, beige bedding, generic art prints on the walls. Every trace of me was gone. No posters, no desk, no shelves, no hint that someone had spent 18 years growing up in that space. Like I was never there. They didn't just push me out. They erased me. That was the moment the idea began to take shape. Not revenge. Not yet. At first, it was just curiosity. I wanted to see the house. Just once. One last time before it belonged to someone else. So that weekend, I borrowed a collared shirt from my roommate, printed a fake pre-approval letter using a free online template, and booked a tour through the real estate site using a burner Gmail. Buyer name, Ryan L. Email, lamepurchases@gmail.com. I didn't know what I was expecting when I pulled up to the curb in a borrowed car. Maybe to feel a rush of emotion. Nostalgia. Bitterness. But mostly, I just felt numb. The porch creaked the same way it used to. The front door still had the scratch near the bottom where I'd once tried to sneak in a stray cat. And the real estate agent, a perky woman named Sasha with 2 white teeth, had no idea she was walking through a landmine. So the sellers are really motivated, she chirped. Looking for a quick close. They've already moved most of their personal stuff out. Looking to downsize now that their youngest is off to college. I nodded politely, letting her guide me from room to room. I barely listened. My focus was on the walls, the spaces, the energy, and the gaping absence of me. When we got to the backyard, I paused. The fence was newer. Mason must have helped build it, or at least posed for a photo while someone else did. The treehouse I'd built with my uncle, back when I was 12 and still had hope, was gone. Torn down. Nothing left but a patch of disturbed dirt and a few rusty nails sticking out of a log. I'll give you a minute, Sasha said, sensing something in my silence. I nodded and walked toward the back fence, keeping my hands in my pockets to stop them from shaking. That night, I sat in my car long after the engine cooled. And I knew. It wasn't just curiosity anymore. It was war. They wanted to pretend I never existed? Fine. Then I'd make sure the world knew exactly who I was. And that they were the ones who lost me. I didn't want to burn the house down. That would have been too easy. Too fast. I wanted something slower. Smarter. Permanent. So I started planning. First step, research. I spent the next week digging into property records. Who actually owned the house? What their finances looked like. Thanks to a few publicly available databases, I found out something interesting. The mortgage wasn't paid off. And they were behind. Not much, just a few months. But enough. Enough to raise questions about why they were really selling. I filed that away. Next step, get help. I called someone I hadn't spoken to in a while. Milo, an old classmate from high school who used to run a tech club and now worked freelance in cybersecurity. We weren't close, but I knew 2 things about him. He hated bullies, and he owed me a favor from way back when I covered for him during a plagiarism accusation. We met for coffee. I laid out a version of the story, not everything, just the core. "What do you need?" he asked. "I need access to the real estate documents. Maybe seller disclosures. Any correspondence I can find. I want to know what they're hiding." Milo cracked his knuckles. "Give me 48 hours. He came through in 36. Turns out, my parents had listed the house without disclosing a major plumbing issue that had started in the basement, something that could cost thousands to fix. The documents were forged. Not just misleading, illegal. I saved every file. Printed copies. Uploaded backups to encrypted cloud storage. The evidence was there. But I didn't want to blow it all at once. I wanted to time it. Precision mattered. Meanwhile, I reached out to the college admin office and confirmed something I'd been quietly working on for months. I was eligible to transfer into a full scholarship program thanks to my GPA and work-study contributions. They wanted me to speak at the fall orientation as a first-generation student. That's when the idea hit me. What if I invited them? Not directly, of course. But what if they saw me, standing on a stage, holding a scholarship certificate, announced to an audience as someone they'd given up on? And what if, right around that same time, the buyers for their house backed out, and someone reported their fraudulent documents? What if everything they'd built their image on started to crack? Not because I screamed, but because I succeeded, because I smiled, because I made it without them, and then made it clear they were never part of the journey. That was the setup, and I wasn't done yet. I had one more card to play. A name. Mason. He was still their golden boy, still their pride and joy, but I knew things about him, things even they didn't. Old screenshots. Messages he sent from the school-issued iPad when he was 17, joking about borrowing money from my dad's wallet and blaming the maid. Comments about blowing off community service hours and having his friends sign attendance forms. Minor stuff, until you packaged it together and handed it to a college admissions committee. I hadn't used any of it. Not yet. But I would. Only if they pushed. Because I didn't need to destroy their lives. I just needed them to watch me build mine. Brick by brick. Speech by speech. Without them. And then, when the moment was perfect, I'd drop the match. Quiet. Controlled. Undeniable. And walk away. Not bitter. Not broken. Just free. I didn't want the ending to be loud. Not a scene. Not a tantrum. I wanted it to feel quiet, measured. Like placing the final stone on a grave. And that's exactly how it played out. The house sale was the first domino to fall. I timed everything carefully. Waited until the buyers had gone through inspection, financing, all the drawn-out steps. Waited until they were emotionally and financially invested. Then I sent them a little anonymous package, courtesy of a third-party forwarding service that guaranteed no return address. Inside was a flash drive. On it, photos of the basement flooding from the old sump pump issue, screenshots of the forged disclosure document, and a typed letter that read, "This house has a secret. The sellers didn't fix it, they covered it up. If you sign that contract, the problem becomes yours. Think twice. Ask the agent about the sump pump and see what happens." The fallout was immediate. 3 days later, the house disappeared from Zillow. The buyers backed out. The listing went dark. And my parents, who were already behind on their mortgage, were now staring down foreclosure if they couldn't find a new buyer in time. Except this time, they couldn't fudge the paperwork. The plumbing issue was flagged. Legally. Publicly. Any new buyer would demand repair credits they couldn't afford to give. I didn't even have to lift a finger after that. I just watched. Meanwhile, I said yes to the orientation speech. The school had arranged for a local news crew to film parts of it for a segment on community success stories. I didn't expect it to be a big deal, just a 5-minute slot on a sleepy Sunday news hour. But what I didn't expect. The article. A few days after the orientation, someone from the city college board reached out and asked if they could feature my story on their website. I said sure, figuring it'd be a blurb. Instead, they ran a full profile, headshot, interview, the whole 9 yards. From disowned to Dean's List, Ryan Lane's journey from abandonment to academic triumph. It was dramatic. A little too dramatic, honestly. But it was real. And it spread. People shared it. Old classmates saw it. Teachers. Neighbors. Eventually, so did my parents. I found out through a secondhand Facebook comment someone screenshotted and texted to me. This article is full of exaggerations. Some kids just don't appreciate how much their family sacrifices for them. It was my mother's comment. Passive-aggressive, anonymous enough to seem subtle, but clearly hers. She was spiraling, and I wasn't done yet. Because Mason, the golden boy, had just started applying to transfer universities. And I still had those screenshots. I didn't want to destroy his future, but I wanted a warning shot. So I sent a short, anonymous email to the admissions office of the school he was gunning for. Just a few select lines about falsified community service records, a suspicious paper trail of attendance forms, and a history of academic oversights. I attached 3 old screenshots of him joking about it. I signed it. For the integrity of your academic program. Whether they acted on it or not didn't matter. What mattered was that Mason would know someone new, and he'd never feel untouchable again. Now, here's the part one didn't expect. They came to me. Not together. Separately. First it was my dad. He showed up at the campus help desk one Tuesday morning. Eyes bloodshot, tie loose, face haggard. "Ryan," he said, "we need to talk." I stared at him. Calm. Steady. "You mean now that the house is unsellable and Mason's applications are falling apart?" I said, keeping my voice quiet. He blinked, like he wasn't expecting me to admit it. "We didn't know it had gotten this bad," he said. "You've made your point, okay? We get it." "No," I said. "You don't. And that's why it got this far." He tried again. "We can fix it. Maybe come home. Let's talk this through." I smiled, small and cold. "There is no home," I said. "You burned that bridge and sold the ashes." Then I turned around and walked away. He didn't follow. 2 weeks later, I got a letter from my mom. No envelope. Just a piece of paper slipped under the apartment door in the middle of the night. "Ryan, we made mistakes. I see that now. But you're being cruel. Punishing us like this doesn't make you better than us. Please, this is your family." "Mom." I didn't respond. Instead, I did something else. I sent her a photo. A simple one. Me, standing in front of the college banner, holding my scholarship award, smiling. On the back, I wrote, "This is what consequences look like." And that was the last message I ever sent them. Since then, the house was foreclosed on. Mason transferred, but not to the school he wanted. And my parents moved into a rental house 2 counties over, smaller, older, with a lawn they don't post pictures of. As for me, I'm thriving. Graduated with honors. Started working with a nonprofit that helps first-gen students navigate college without family support. I mentor kids who feel invisible, just like I did. I have a new apartment, a dog, a full fridge, friends who choose me. And not once, have I needed to look back. My revenge wasn't loud. It didn't come with slamming doors or screaming matches. It came with quiet wins, with unstoppable progress, with the kind of success you build brick by brick while they're busy watching for a collapse. And the best part? They'll spend the rest of their lives pretending they didn't lose a son, while I spend the rest of mine never needing them again. I wasn't the disappointment in that house. I was the escape artist they never saw coming.